Welcome to our first video where we're going to be talking about using Microsoft Excel. So I'm guessing that a lot of you have used Excel before, or maybe you've at least heard of Excel, but in case you don't know, Microsoft Office is the company and Excel is one of their products, just like Microsoft Word. And Excel is a spreadsheet software, or I shouldn't say software, it's a spreadsheet tool. There's other spreadsheet tools as well besides Excel, but Excel's a very popular one. And using spreadsheets is really important when you're working with data because a lot of times we're going to be collecting and storing data in spreadsheets. So when we talk about a spreadsheet, what we mean is kind of this grid style here. We're going to notice there's kind of two orientations to looking at data in a spreadsheet. So the first one is going to be one row. So each row of a data spreadsheet is going to represent one unit of observation. So you might notice in this particular data set that each of these rows represents one movie, right? And so we have several kind of characteristics about that movie here. So, and that gets us into what the column represents. So that's the other orientation we can look at this spreadsheet in. Each column is one variable of data that we've collected about each of these units of observation. So we've collected the year that movie was released, the title of that movie, and then some other things that we're going to talk about in just a second. So this is kind of the common structure for data. We don't typically store data where each column is a unit of observation and each row is a variable. You certainly could do that, but a lot of software works under the assumption that you saved it this particular way. So this is going to be the way you should think about storing and reading data, with each row as a unit of observation, each column as a variable of information, of characteristics about that movie. All right, so this particular data set is storing information about the Bechdel test. So if you haven't heard of that before, the Bechdel test is a criteria to talk about the role of women in a movie, to put it very simplistically. And specifically what it is it's a set of three criteria. The first criteria is that the movie has at least two women in the movie. That those two women speak to each other is the second criteria, and that those two women speak to each other about something besides men as the third criteria. So there was an observation, I guess, at some point that a lot of popular movies didn't have women in important roles or women kind of in roles unrelated to the lead men in the movie. So this is kind of one way to see how a movie kind of stacked up against that criteria. So that's what this column right here is representing, is basically whether or not the movie passed that test. And then this result column is basically saying how far down the criteria it got. You know, did it have two women? So like no talk would mean there's two women, but they didn't talk to each other. Let's see. Men means they talked to each other, but they only talked about men. Okay means it passed. Dubious means, I guess, it was hard to determine. At least I think that's what everything means. And then no women would mean that there aren't two women in the movie. In primary roles at least. All right, these other columns over here are the budget of the movie, domestic gross earnings, international gross earnings, and then these three columns adjust everything to 2013 dollars, since the amount these movies might have been making in decades ago would not have stacked up, so those numbers have been adjusted over here. All right, so to wrap up this video, I'm just going to talk a little bit about kind of moving around Excel. So you should get in the habit of using your arrow keys or using the tab and enter keys to kind of move around different cells as much as possible. It's not that you can't click around, but I'm going to show you why you should be careful about that. If you ever have any cells that have formulas in them, like this one, and we're going to talk about formulas a little bit later, and you're clicked into that formula and you go click somewhere else on the spreadsheet, you can mess up that formula. So in that very special case, you want to be careful about clicking around cells if you're working with cells that have formulas in them. So as long as you're clicked somewhere where there isn't a formula, or you're not like clicked inside the formula itself, it should be fine to navigate around. You won't mess anything up. But it's just kind of nice for when you're just like navigating directly around to use either arrow keys or those other tab and enter keys on your computer. The last thing that I'll mention is just updating or moving columns around. So in some of these cases, like this column right here, we can't see all of the entries here. So you can either manually adjust that column to be the width that you want, or there's another trick here that if you want to see the longest entry, you can double click on the column and it will automatically adjust to fit the longest entry, which I guess is that long somewhere on the spreadsheet. If that's too big, obviously you can adjust it to be about the width that you'd like that to be. All right, so that will complete our first video, and we'll continue on with a few things in the next video.